As you were describing both the experiences and the classes, it just made me realize I think I'd love to take, some or all of those courses. Can you quickly go through, because we have probably a lot of Georgia Tech students out there that are getting even more interested. Can you quickly run through some of the courses, and also tell students where they can find them?
Okay, excellent. So students can find a list of all the courses in the Global Engineering Leadership minor in two places. If in fact, all you need to do is Google Global Engineering Leadership minor, and our minor comes out on the top. But you can go to the Civil Engineering website. You can link to the web page for the minor there. And then you can also go to Leadership Education and Development at Georgia Tech, and you'll be able to link to the minor pages from there. So the gateway course to the minor is Foundations of Leadership. It introduces students to different ways of exercising leadership, helps them to identify their own strengths and weaknesses and how they can best work with others in a leadership context. You see topics like development of leadership theories, values and ethics, group dynamics, multiculturalism in leadership, performance excellence, conflict resolution, and so on and so forth. We have the Global Engineering Leadership course. Now, I should say that the Foundations of Leadership course is taught by Dr. Wes Winers, who is the director of the leadership program. And then we have the Global Engineering Leadership course taught by Rudy Bonaparte, Dr. Rudy Bonaparte, and Dr. Lisa Rosenstein. This course introduces students to a range of skills necessary to succeed as a leader in an engineering firm. A very nice thing about this course is that it has several mentors who are either presidents, CEOs, directors of major engineering companies who work with the project teams in the course to develop a company, the blueprint for a company, and then morph the blueprint to the next level to take the company overseas. So this is a very fun course. The students like it a lot. We have environmental technology in the developing world taught by Dr. Joe Brown. It's a hands-on course on air and water quality studies in low technology environments and the linkages to public health. The students learn communication. Dr. Lisa Rosenstein is part of the course. They also get some immersion and in cross-cultural awareness when they travel to Bolivia, and also get an understanding of leadership in the context of new technologies. Then we have construction management and mega projects, which is looking at methods, models, and best practices for effective and efficient planning and construction and delivery and operation of mega projects. Now, mega projects are projects that are $1 billion or more. The students are able to also learn about cultural and ethical issues, contractual and legal issues, dispute resolution, and effective team development in this course. Then we have Sustainable Transportation Abroad taught by Dr. Carrie Watkins. This course is looking at the planning, design, and operations of transportation systems in the countries that are known for sustainable multimodal approach to transportation. The students get to develop cultural awareness in this course, and they also get a taste of mentored learning. What does it mean? It means Dr. Watkins embeds transportation professionals in the course when they travel abroad to the Netherlands for their field work. So the chief bicycle officer, different of Atlanta, different professionals like that. So the students can get to experience the course also through the eyes of matured professionals based on the kinds of questions they ask. And it's a rich learning environment. Disaster reconnaissance studies taught by Dr. David Frost looks at hazards engineering and disaster management. The course travels to China and Japan. We have Introduction to Structures and Historic Structures taught by Dr. Lauren Stewart and Dr. Lisa Rosenstein, key concepts in structural engineering, system resilience, and the student get a real dose of written, oral, and graphical communication in this course. In fact, one of the students said about this course, you are going to have a lot of projects. You're not going to sleep a lot. You just have to suck it up. But they love the course. They have said many wonderful things about these courses. Smart and Sustainable Cities, Introduction to How Cities Function, examining various infrastructure systems like transportation, power, water, and buildings. And then understanding key challenges and emerging solutions in urban environments to create more sustainable cities. The students learn about how to effectively communicate with urban stakeholders on various smart solutions to sustainability challenges. Origami Engineering is looking at state-of-the-art algorithms to design origami structures. The students then get to apply origami engineering to solve societal problems. They also get formal training in team building and communication and the development of individual awareness. And then we have a couple of courses, well, one more course, Water Resources Systems, taught by Dr. Georgia Kakos. This is looking at water resources planning and management in the face of climatic, environmental, socioeconomic, and technological change. Now, the students also get a chance to develop stakeholder engagement techniques. They are introduced to public policy development, team leadership and dynamics, and then self-reflection and awareness. And recently, and I'm sure we are going to talk about this because I know this is one of your favorite topics, we started developing courses in entrepreneurship, which also open to the students, leadership students. And so we have a course, Innovation and Entrepreneurship for Civil Engineering Systems, taught by Dr. John Taylor, Bill Higginbotham, and Dr. Robert Simon. And perhaps we will just save this and talk about it when we get to if we get to talking about entrepreneurship. Another course, final course, Infrastructure Finance, is also one of the courses looking at methods, models, and best practice for effective infrastructure finance. Students get to develop collaboration skills in an environment with competing viewpoints and objectives. These two courses are the two of the most recent courses. They were piloted in the spring of 2020.
So before you just barely touched on the developing entrepreneurship program inside civil engineering, as you said, something that's really very close to my heart. We think a lot of times when we think of entrepreneurship and startups, we think of super high tech kinds of things, new gadgets, social media, things of that type. But it's absolutely the case that entrepreneurship is just as important in civil and environmental engineering. And I'm really curious about what it is you all are thinking, and how that folds into some of the global engineering leadership minor stuff. So can't wait to hear what you are doing about entrepreneurship in civil and environmental engineering.
There are already several opportunities, including CreateX, that the students can participate in. John Taylor has taught a prototyping course, so we're thinking through how he can adapt it and offer it as the next course after the intro course. There's an infrastructure finance course we already have. Mike Mesner teaches. And then we are thinking about an entrepreneurship practicum where students can go and embed in a company. It could be a venture company, but get a good sense of entrepreneurship. We are going to roll out an annual entrepreneurship impact competition and prize this year. It's got the Higginbotham Entrepreneurship Impact Prize is going to reward creating value in the broadest of senses. Okay, so whether it's creating value for some local community, creating value in the context of a firm during an internship, as a group team or team project within a course, but some kind of value creation that improves the social and human condition. The prize is $5,000, and students get to win this. A group or individual or group of students gets to win this on an annual basis. So as you see, we are really developing some entrepreneurship pathway. We want to instill entrepreneurial mindset and confidence in our students, so that even when they leave Georgia Tech, graduate, and go to a company, they don't think of themselves solely as employees. We want them to think of themselves as value-creating individuals who are going to come there and create value orders of magnitude higher than they would otherwise. And so I think that's the idea.
I had a chance to participate in a panel that you moderated on the topic of race in America and social justice. That panel that you led focused on what we in the Georgia Tech community can do to make improvements in higher education, in our campus, the companies that we work with, and in the world at large. And I'm really curious about hearing your thoughts, not only about what we talked about, what the challenges were, but how that conversation is evolving within civil and environmental engineering. Okay.
I think this is a very important question. And first of all, let me thank you for participating in that panel, and for participating in it in such an open and honest, just a candid way. I think the panel was a tremendous moment in our school history from my perspective. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I think in part because everybody who participated on the panel, I think, was just brought a very honest and open approach to the topic, and that made a difference. But I will tell you that I also think the fact that the dean was on the panel made a difference. Okay. It made people realize that the impacts of racism are quite broad. Okay, you may be surprised who may be, on the receiving end of racism. But I think it also made people feel it's okay to talk about it. So to me, maybe that's one of the biggest things that came out of the panel. I've been at Georgia Tech for 20 years. When I say 20 years, I find it very funny because I don't feel it's been 20 years. But I've been at Georgia Tech for 20 years. We've never had such a discussion, at least in my experience. And let me just say that I have never been in such a discussion. So now people can have honest and open discussions about race. Huge movement forward in my experience, in my point of view, from my point of view. Because I think once you can do that, then there is a pathway to begin to make real progress, you see. And I think people should be able to have those conversations and maybe disagree, but disagree amicably and try to understand why they disagree. Because to me, that's how steps forward are made. So that's the first thing. So I think that the discussions continue. Now, one of the things that we decided to really focus on is hiring some of our outstanding minority faculty. We have to bring some more minority faculty, is what we agreed on. So we have put together, Dawn Webster, the school chair, has put together a faculty search committee, and I'm going to serve on it as well. And one of our tasks is to identify outstanding minority faculty and with the goal of hiring additional minority faculty. I think that is extremely important because, number one, when we have more minority faculty, then I think more minority perspectives get reflected in decision making, and certainly the environment reflects that. Okay. Number two, students can look up into the faculty and see minority faculty. That makes a difference. for non-minority and for minority students. And then number three, I think it's very helpful when minority students can look into the faculty and see minority faculty like themselves, because it changes their perception of who can be a faculty. Okay, and that helps with recruiting of students. That helps with retention of students at all levels, and it also helps with recruiting of faculty and retention of faculty. I think all the things I've said are things we all know. So, but I just wanted to emphasize them. So I think that's one of the major things we've continued to talk about, and I've started taking steps to make happen. We also followed up the panel with an open discussion with our staff about what we can do to create a more inclusive environment that recognizes what they do in a certain way, and also recognizes them as co-creators of the environment in which we are educating our students. Okay, so this is something that's in process, and we are going to be thinking and working through how we can continue to enhance our environment to be that. And then in terms of the students talked about a number of things as well, and what we are planning to do is to work with student advisory councils to prioritize the issues raised by the students.
You know, I know that you're also interested in the overlap between transportation and how overlap between transportation and sustainability. And you know, we're recording this podcast, you know, in the midst of being off campus and you know, everything associated with COVID-19. So I know that you recently contributed to an article on 5 lessons that the current pandemic is teaching us about what it means to develop sustainability through the lens of transportation. Sounds fascinating. All of those pieces kind of coming together in a really challenging time. Can you share a little bit more about what you're doing in that work?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll be glad to. So, you know, we wrote this paper because when COVID-19 hit, we wanted to take it as an opportunity to learn some lessons. And essentially, what we've recognized is that there have been challenging times across history. But every time there are challenging times, well, of course, you know, we may see that the people lose their lives, they lose their livelihoods, etc. But we see that it's also an opportunity, and sometimes it's an opportunity people take to learn lessons and do things better. So this was really the idea behind this paper. And, you know, we started it out talking about thinking multimodally, okay, in terms of transportation. What do we mean? It means we really are going to serve ourselves well, and it actually is a resilience strategy if we have a good multimodal transportation system that offers multiple choices that are effective choices for transportation. And the reason we started with that is, you know, if you look in the literature historically, public transit has been considered a very sustainable transportation mode. And it is, if you think about it from the perspective of the carbon footprint, okay, and the emissions per capita, then it certainly is much more sustainable than vehicles, single occupant vehicles in particular. But you notice that when COVID-19 hit, many people decided they don't want to use public transit anymore because they wanted to reduce their exposure to the virus. So public health pivoted to become the critical risk in their eyes, right? And so all of a sudden, we couldn't say, well, public transit is the most sustainable. We couldn't say that anymore because the context has shifted, right? And so, and that's the whole point. The point is that the critical risks to developing sustainably, they are not fixed. They will continue to shift from time to time. And so it is really a robust strategy or to develop all the modes in a way that they are seamless and fit together very well and offer choices, multiple choices, so that as the risks shift, the most critical risks shift, we can also pivot to different modes in a seamless fashion, and that makes us more sustainable. Okay, so we talked a bit about that, and that means that the kinds of models and analytical frameworks we use for planning must be comprehensive. We cannot only focus on the natural environment or at one time focus on public health and the next time focus on it. We have to focus on all of them simultaneously. And we also have to talk about resilience because resilience is critical. And I actually see that with, when the demand for public transit went down, it meant that financial resources for public transit also followed. So you will notice that some laws have been passed to provide infusions of funding into public transit to keep public transit viable. So developing economic capital in itself is another resilience strategy, because it means that when these kinds of situations show up, you have the wherewithal to do these kinds of infusions when people lose their jobs, when public transit is not as financially viable, and so on and so forth. And so it tells us that we can't, simply because we have one particular risk, we can't decide to just focus on that. We must continue to develop all the capital in a balanced way: economic, environmental, social capital, and equity capital all together. So we talked a bit about that. And then we also talked about teleactivities as part of an effective infrastructure sustainability strategy. And why? Because the COVID-19 era has really given us practice with teleactivities. Global workplace analytics, which is known as one of the nation's authorities on work at home, estimates that just a little above 3% of people work from home half-time or more. Okay. And then if we look at the Gallup polls, they also show that 43% of the workforce works at home at least some of the time. Okay. But they make a prediction. They predict that the longer people are required to work at home, the greater the adoption of working at home we will see when the dust settles. And they give a few reasons, right? They say that basically the first one is reduced concern of managers and executives. That was one of the biggest holdbacks to remote working. Trust that employees are doing work when they're home. But in this COVID era, many managers have come to see that their employees can be actually quite effective working at home. My own experience, I feel I've been much more effective working from home in this COVID-19 era. So that changes the thinking. Increased pressures for disaster preparedness. Essentially what they said was that this COVID-19, it took people by surprise. And people do not want that to happen again. So they want to have a viable alternative in case it's needed. They pivot and start working from home. So this is not going away, right? There's some cost-saving opportunities that come with working from home. I think you know that if you drive every day to work, you probably haven't bought gas for the past 2 months if you're like me, right? And then the congestion. Sitting in congestion, I spent at least 1 hour a day on the freeway. So in the year, over 300 hours. I think I can write maybe 3 more papers or even a book, maybe a small book, right? So I think people are thinking about
all these
things, right?
We'll hold you to that, Adjo.
Yes, and
I've written that one down.
So, okay, good. So you see, and then finally, the increased awareness of the impact on sustainability in terms of air quality. A few weeks into COVID-19, I walked I walked out of the building and looked at the sky, and I felt it was bluer than I've ever seen. And then I started reading articles and looking at data on emissions, and clearly in many cities air quality has improved, because congestion has reduced and so on and so forth. So it's not going away. That's the projection. But how many people are going to work from home? How are they going to work from home? Can we actually use this as an opportunity to think about a multi-pronged strategy that is just more effective? When does it make sense to have face-to-face interaction? And let's be intentional about doing that then. And when can we work from home? So in other words, teleworking has become part of an effective transportation strategy and actually a resilience strategy. So we talked about that. And then we also talked about economic capital as being very important, even when it is not the critical existential threat, because you can use it to tide over challenging times, like make infusions into public transit when it's not financially viable, as we talked about, and so on and so forth. And then finally, we also talked about social capital. Social capital, just simply building the coalitions and networks to enable things to happen that we want to happen. And we've seen this in the era of COVID-19, which is more of an acute shock. It's been an acute shock to us. But in this ongoing challenge of the changing climate, if we've been able to mobilize ourselves to address some of these COVID-19 issues, we can even all the more so mobilize ourselves for this sort of long-standing chronic stress of climate change. So really understanding that we can do the same in both fast-moving and slow-moving disasters. And we have multiple going on in parallel.